You ready, Mr. Ethan?
I am ready.
What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Awakened Catholic Show. I am your host, Nick de la Torre, and today I am joined by a dear friend of mine, an incredible mind, and a beautiful soul, Mr. Andrew Reinhart, who is also the host of the show Physically Spiritual, produced here at Awakened Catholic. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
We're going to be talking about you. We're going to be talking about our friendship. We're going to be talking about the show, Physically Spiritual, why it matters, and why specifically it should matter to you. All of that is coming up right after this. Welcome back to the Awakened Catholic Show, everyone. This is not your grandmother's Catholic talk show, unless she's a really, really cool grandmother. So today I have with me the beautiful man, Andrew Reinhart. Andrew, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Nick.
How are you feeling today? We just got done live streaming for your show where you interviewed me, and now we've flipped roles. I am interviewing you, and this time I'm going to make you cry. How are you feeling about that?
I feel scared, really scared.
I think you're right to be scared.
I could use a good cry, though.
Yeah, couldn't we all sometimes, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, we're live streaming this. We haven't live streamed for a while. The live stream we did for Andrew's show a little bit ago is the first live stream we had ever done from our new studio. The previous one was in my basement. And so it's kind of a nice trial run. Everything went pretty smoothly. We had good connections. But today, this is part of a series of episodes that we're doing about the different shows that are produced here at Awakened Catholic. So the last episode that came out was about the show Elevate Ordinary with hosts John Mark and Teresa Grodi. And today I am overjoyed to be with Andrew, the host of Physically Spiritual. So Andrew, we first met, we covered some of this ground in the last episode. We first met on the campus of Bowling Green State University. You were the campus minister, the new campus minister at St. Thomas More University Parish, and I think the first time I met you was during some sand volleyball. Do you remember that?
No.
Yeah,
not at all.
That's exactly what happened in the last episode. John Mark was like, yeah, I don't remember you. It's an interesting dynamic because I was this guy that was coming into the faith, the church, for the first time in like a radical and passionate way, and you were just a campus minister trying to love on these young people, and I was one of many. But like in that part of my journey, you were like the campus minister, you know?
Ooh.
Oh yeah. So it's no surprise that you don't remember me. But
what I do remember is I met Alina before you.
Okay.
And I was thoroughly prepared to meet a monster. Because at the time, you were not together, and she frequently would play sad songs on the piano, and her and her friends spoke very lowly of you at the time.
And I'm sure that everything that was said was probably true. Because, like, honestly, man, I was a mess. And that's why the relationships that I was building and friendships I was finding in that part of my journey have been so pivotal for me. And that's why you were so pivotal for me. Is like, I had to leave a lot of things behind between vices and even some friendships. I had to like really slow down because I had to really die to myself. I had to die to everything that was going on and allow a new person, a new creation to come forth that was, hopefully what the person that God wanted me to start becoming. And so people like yourself who, in your case, it's different than some of the other cases like, Rob Holler and the Grodis even, because they were like friends first for me. You initially were like playing this mentor role. You were mentoring me in a super intentional way. We would meet every morning, or not every morning. We would meet, I think, once a week for coffee at Kermit's, a great grease spoon here in Bowling Green, Ohio. We would have coffee and breakfast, and you were reading through a couple of books with me. Like the first book might have been on Platonics. It might have been like an introduction to Plato or something like that. And then the second book, I think, was Theology for Beginners by Frank Sheed. And I still have that book. I still love that book. I still recommend that book because it really was so formative for me, and especially working through it with you. But not enough of us are willing to take the time that you took with me, like going out of your way to set aside time to meet with me once a week and set aside time to read through these books again for me, with me. Thank you for all of that. I mean, it was huge.
Yeah, welcome. That's how it works. Like this is nice. Like doing a podcast is good, and it's people encounter us through the podcast. They, this has a wide reach. It can have a big effect, but like the gospel happens in personal relationships, one-on-one or in small groups.
Yes.
Like that's how Jesus did it. Like he got 12 guys together and they lived together. Like that was intentional. And then throughout the gospel, you see him continually again and again, actually like trying to make the crowd smaller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think part of that is because like this whole thing happens in small communities.
Yeah. Amen.
So it's like thinking of that from like, at the time I was in campus ministry and I was in parish ministry after that for a decade, and now I'm working in diocesan ministry. That's kind of my paying job. Like the temptation is to like evaluate what you're doing based on like how many people you get to show up, like how big of a crowd can be there, or how much the word gets out, or all of that. But that's not what Jesus did.
No.
Like he really literally worked to make the crowd smaller oftentimes, because there was something about his work that could only be spread on a heart-to-heart level. So that's been an important thing for me from the beginning, because that's how I was discipled when I was in college, in the context of St. Paul's outreach, in small groups and one-on-one. There were a handful of priests in my life who reached out to me and spent the time to form me and to train me, and to give me insight and relationship and to help me grow. So that when I got into working in ministry, that's what I knew was the important part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because it's the harder work and it really demands of the person who is doing the ministering and the discipling, it really demands of that person more work and more intentionality, more sacrifice. Lord knows that if it had not been for your willingness to make that sacrifice for me and other people like Father Mike Dandurand, who also made similar sacrifices. I mentioned on the last episode that he took me and one other guy, Damien Santiago, on a discernment retreat at St. Meinrad Seminary, where we stayed with the monks, we prayed with the monks, and he set aside that time for Damien and I. We were just two weird college kids, we were a bunch of punks, and he was willing to set aside that amount of time for us. And it was powerful. And that retreat alone has impacted my prayer life, my spirituality in a resounding way throughout my life. And so that intentional willingness to sacrifice for even just one person, that's something that we need to see more of, even in ourselves. We should never grow weary of approaching things that way. It gets harder when you're a married man with kids, you have to put that ministry first. And if you're having to choose in terms of the ways in which you spend your time and sacrifice with your time, you have to choose between some other person or your wife and kid. You need to make the right choice there, and that's your wife and kid. But any degree to which there is space that you can make that work, we should all be doing that in different ways. Some of us, like you, had a much more profound theological backbone than the average layperson. And so we need to stay in our lane in a sense. And if ministering to someone means loving them well, do that, but also don't pretend you're a theologian that you're not, and then end up conveying heresy and stuff. So thank you for all of that. And that really laid the groundwork for a relationship that has lasted, a brotherhood that has lasted for years. And it isn't just you and I. There's a community of us that have kind of God, geographically we spread for a while, and God has brought us kind of all back together into the same geography. And even when we were spread apart geographically, we were still close, intimately, emotionally. I've always had you as a brother, even when we didn't see each other a lot for a while. So it's amazing when we are willing to make the sacrifices, when we spend, as Matthew Kelly calls it, carefree timelessness with someone, where you're not trying to get something out of it. You're just with someone. that is what forms intimacy. That is what forms relationships. And it took sacrifice, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, if the sacrifice is eating breakfast and reading good books, then I'll do it again.
So when we were, and by the way, if you want to learn about how Physically Spiritual as a show got started, go to the live stream that we just did, the recording of it, for the Physically Spiritual show, because we go into great lengths about all of it. But just as like a small recap, as we were building up this Awakened Catholic ministry, you were one of the first people that I reached out to, because I was, number one, I wanted people, like truly authentic people. I was thinking about saying truly good people, but like we're only as good as we are on any given day, right? But you authentically, I've always known you to be someone that's authentically pursuing the best version of yourself, and to more and more conform yourself in mind and heart to what God wants for you. And I wanted people involved in the project that were authentically representing that approach to living, but then secondarily had acute areas of focus in terms of your own passion that could be made into content that could be delivered to people and bless people with it. So I knew of you, the incredible journey that you had been on of discovery, of learning, of transformation, of spirit and body. And I knew, like, with the acuity of the type of research that you had been doing and the very unique ways in which you were combining that research with practical implementation and a holistic understanding of the person, I knew that was messaging that would bless so many people. And I know that it has. And so that's why I had approached you. I knew the things that you were studying. I knew the things that you were putting together. And I was like, this needs to get out in front of people. This can't just be in Andrew's little den with a journal, you know? Like, what was your reaction when I first approached you about it?
My first reaction, at first I was not attracted to the idea. I loved podcasts. I'd listened to podcasts for years. I felt like maybe I'd missed the wave, you know, like a lot of times when a new thing takes on, there's kind of like a growth curve. And then, so I felt like, maybe it's not the right time to start a podcast. There's a lot of people doing it. I also, I didn't want to, sometimes I'm a little harsh on this, but I didn't want to like make more noise online, you know. I didn't want to just be another person talking just to talk. So I wasn't drawn to it at first, but and my real work at the time was to try to write a book about everything that I was researching and learning about. But as I prayed about it and considered it, two things struck me. One, there's a lot of books that get published and nobody ever reads them. So one approach to publishing today is to actually build the audience before you write the book. That's kind of like the Tim Ferriss approach to some extent. He kind of puts all the content out on his podcast before he publishes it in the book. And then the other thing to consider was just that, the direction of the way that people are consuming content, that this is a new platform that's growing, and it being listenable, people can just consume more of it, right? Because you can throw it in your ears while you're mowing the lawn or while you're doing the dishes, while you're driving to work. If you're going to read somebody's book, you got to sit down and read the book, and unless they make an audiobook out of it too. But then, so I just felt like it would be maybe a way to get the word out. I also sensed a kind of a bit of a pride in myself, a vanity, like I'd rather be an author than a podcaster. It just sounds better, like it's a much more respectable thing to do for the old school out there. So part of me, I think, was like holding on to this idea of who I wanted to be. So a part of it too was also accepting that this could be God's plan. So as I was praying and thinking about it, I was like, okay, Lord, like maybe this is what you want me to do. And so that's why I came around to the idea.
Yeah, I mean, you had been formulating for a while a lot of your own processing of and digesting of the information you were learning and the ways in which you were implementing it. So what was it like to take this stuff that was so near and dear and private, because it was your journey that was on paper? What was it like to take all of that and turn it into something that was for everyone?
Yeah. There's a couple things. One, I like to have things really good and tight and clean before sharing it. Like I want it to be like the final version before it gets out there. But sharing content this way, this is a very like iterative process. It's like you put something out there, you get some feedback, and a lot of what we do in publishing is you end up putting it back out as a better version. There's almost some more a circular kind of approach to what I'm doing now, where I'm revisiting topics, but then taking them deeper and trying to be clearer. So that was part of the mind shift of like, at first I was really uncomfortable with the quality. Just like I wanted it both to be like really appealing if a random person off the street were to tune up the show and listen to it, and that they'd be interested and learn something and understand it. But if like one of the greatest theologians in the world turned on the show, I wanted to also make sure that it was good, and that they would see like the depth and the quality and the richness, and not sit there and point out all the heresies and mistakes that I was making.
Right.
So I had this probably unrealistic expectation for the quality. So that was part of it, was like coming to embrace the iterative nature of it. That like this is online, this is forever. Like Nick, if your cause for canonization ever gets opened up, like there's going to be some old dude in Rome someday that's going to be watching this.
I guarantee you that'll never happen.
And scouring it for heresies and other things. It's like this is going to make the Vatican's job pretty hard in the future. Maybe they'll outsource some of the canonization process to AI or something at some point. But anyways,
ChatGPT. Should this person be a saint? Yes or no?
Yeah. So there was definitely a shift in mindset, but also I think part of it playing into some of my personal woundedness of perfectionism, vanity, and a need to, I think, be more broken, accept that, and to show that, to have more humanity in the content. So something I tried to do right from the beginning was to encourage people that were listening to give me feedback. Like, if you don't agree, like, let me know.
Yeah.
I remember some early YouTube comments from people who weren't Christian, and just,
oh man,
it's like, on one hand, there was I really wanted the feedback. I wanted to be able to sort of iron things out. But then realizing that like people online probably aren't really actually looking for dialogue. There isn't really a pursuit of the truth happening on some of these platforms. It's more of a how do we just like troll and roll, or how do we are it's almost like putting out our propaganda. So there was also, I think, a disappointment I had early on that the quality of engagement just wasn't what I had hoped for. So there was a regulating of my expectations that happened, and accepting of the reality of myself, and really hoping then that, okay, Lord, how are you going to use this? So I think there was a shift from like I want to publish something that's going to be important, to, Lord, I give you this and I ask you to do what you want with it. Yeah,
that's beautiful. And some of what you talked about there about wanting it to be perfect in terms of the things you said and stuff, that's a really interesting dynamic to wrestle with, because on the one hand, we are called as people who in any formal capacity present the gospel, present the truth, or present any information with a Catholic label. There is a responsibility that we carry, that we have to be good stewards of that role and ensure that we aren't knowingly spreading false information, whether it's like explicitly heresy or just something that isn't quite right, So that is a very real responsibility that any of us in this type of capacity maintain. And frankly, there have been some things, not in any of the shows that are currently running on Awakened Catholic, but in some previous productions, there was one episode in particular that when I screened it before it went up, And I don't screen all episodes. At the time, I was, I happened to be a part of that, but whatever. There were some things said by the guest in that show that I just knew I had to say, we can't publish this because it would be irresponsible and not the right thing to do. So we do have that responsibility. And really, anyone has a responsibility to form themselves well enough that they aren't explicitly believing or conveying heresy about certain things, whatever it is. Whether that's Catholic social teaching, whether that's moral sexual ethics, like whatever it is, like we have a responsibility to live our lives in conformity to what God wants for us because it's ultimately what's best for us, and that's how we can convey that better. And then on the other hand, there's the scrupulosity and there's the pride where it's so easy to fall into the analysis paralysis that nothing ever happens. And I think that's kind of what you're expressing. You were torn between those two ideas. Is that fair?
Yeah, and that's where I was with my writing process. I literally have 3 manuscripts sitting on my computer, and each one was it was analysis paralysis. It was, I wanted it to be relatable, but I also wanted it to be academic. And so there's a lot of words there, but none of it that I could probably ever use in any productive way.
Yeah, totally. All right, so I think what this calls for, Andrew, is the Kerygma speed round. Are you ready?
No.
All right, perfect. Who is Jesus to you?
Jesus is my only hope. I've scoured the world of knowledge for answers, scientific research, understandings of meditation, nutrition, science, and the deeper I go, the more I realize that all this stuff, while it's good, there's no hope for the human heart apart from the person of Jesus Christ.
Oof.
I think so much of what's out there is people, they're scrambling for answers apart from Jesus, right? Whether it be, the fad of the month, just, follow one of the popular podcasts, whether it's the, psychedelics or it's the legalization of various drugs, or it's some new social movement or some new technology, and there's all these different ways that we're looking for the basic fundamental answers to the human condition. And I want to say that everything that's true, good, and beautiful is included in what Christ has to offer. But without Christ, everything that's true, good, and beautiful falls short.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like, just as a crude metaphor, it'd be like if I gave you a gift, for the metaphor, we'll say it's a PlayStation 5. Okay? I gift you a PlayStation 5. There's 2 approaches to that. One, I have the PlayStation 5 in my hands, and I'm ready to give it to you. You yank it out of my hands and you disregard the fact that it's coming from me, and you just play the PlayStation and indulge in it and whatever. In contrast, I'm going to hand you this PlayStation 5. It's in my hands, and you see that I am giving this to you. And the very fact that it is being given to you from me, that I cared enough to give it to you, that I spent whatever money was required to give it to you, whatever it took, and I did it with a heart and a passion for you, a desire to bless you with it, and you look into my eyes as I'm handing this to you, and you see all of that, suddenly that gift, that PlayStation 5, has so much more worth, has so much more dignity. Sure, it can be fun, whether you yank it out of my hands and ignore me, or really see what I'm doing and giving that to you. It can be fun both ways, but the latter is far more interesting, is far more beautiful, and represents, the gift then represents something about our relationship too. And I think that's kind of just a crude example of how to see the difference between the good, true, and beautiful things with and without Christ at the center of it.
Yep. And the person that receives the gift without reference to the giver is an infant. That's how babies receive gifts.
Wow. Yeah.
Is you give it to them and they take it and play with it.
Right.
So this is where there is a certain kind of a a selfish smallness in receiving the gifts of creation without reference to the Creator.
Yeah. Wow. I see that. And that is essentially, that harkens back all the way to the Garden of Eden, where the whole principle was like, you can be your own source of blessing, your own gift. Like, you don't need an external God to be over you or whatever. And we've just fundamentally wrestled with the same thing for all of existence.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, that was a great first question of the Kerygma speed round, Andrew. The second question, what's an elevator pitch for a life with Jesus?
An elevator pitch with a life for Jesus.
No, for a life with Jesus.
For a life with Jesus. Got it. The better question is, what's an elevator pitch?
You can choose the height of the building and the speed of the motor of the elevator, but it's basically you're with someone in an elevator. You have whatever time it takes for the elevator ride.
Okay, so my motto is start slow and taper off. So the elevator pitch for the life with Jesus is this: Jesus Christ is the Word made flesh. This means that everything that was present, everything of God that created the universe is in the person of Jesus Christ. So all of the hopes of the human heart are contained in that person. And a life without Jesus is ultimately a life that isn't completely fulfilled. You know, we have a lot of people in the world today that want to sort of like maximize their experience, and they take that to be like, well, I need to go to like every country ever and, have go to these concerts and sort of collect experiences. But all of that falls short of encountering Him who made it all, right? Has given us life, and not only that, but now has redeemed us. So part of the problem is that we don't understand how much we need Jesus because we don't recognize how bad it is without Him.
Yes.
And in this kind of post-Christian world we live in, it's still kind of obscure to us, right? Because in a lot of ways, our society is sort of crumbling around us, but it's still good enough that we can live with the mistaken notion that all this goodness that's around us isn't as a result of Christianity, right? Give it another 100 years or two as totalitarianism rises around the world, and people are going to realize maybe we shouldn't have ditched the gospel. But all of the hopes of the human heart are contained in the person of Jesus Christ.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Okay, final question. Elevator pitch for life specifically as a Catholic.
The Kerygma slow round. Specifically life as a Catholic. Look, when Jesus came, He came and He built a community. He came and He built a community. He formed a group of people that He lived life with. And one of the greatest mistakes in our contemporary mindset is what the fancy philosophical term is solipsism. Solipsism. And solipsism is ultimately like an isolation of your individual ego, your personality, that you're not really in touch with the world around you. And so in so many ways, we are encouraged to be isolated. You can think of the image of like the Marlboro Man, or this solitary figure who provides for all of their own needs. And in our culture, we've replaced across the board relationships with systems.
Yes.
Right. So if I need food, I don't let my friends feed me, right? The government has a system for that. If I get old and can't take care of myself, my loved ones don't care for me. We have a system for that. We put them in a home. If a tree falls over and falls into my house, I don't need my friends. I've got insurance. I've got a system for that. So across the board, right, we've replaced relationships with systems. So now we can live in the illusion of the fulfillment of this kind of solipsistic view. Like, I don't really need anyone else. I can account for all of my needs as a person, food, shelter, et cetera, even get the illusion of my social needs being cared for by social media, right? Without actually encountering anyone else, right? And this is a foretaste of hell.
Wow. Big words, bold words.
Is that isolation in which I don't need anyone else, right? From the beginning, God proclaimed, it's not good for man to be alone. And in a crossword, we are designed and we flourish when we are radically dependent on other people. And that dependency is not just the icing on the cake, it is the cake, right? Because we're in the image of God as a communion of persons, right? So foundationally, the gospel is designed to be received in a community of believers. So to follow Christ outside of a church is to sort of like receive it in a way that's incompatible with our human nature.
Wow. That is super profound. That's wild. Yeah, I'm going to have to ponder that for a while, but so profound, almost as profound as this segue to our sponsor. The Awakened Catholic Show today is sponsored by CatholicMerch.store. If you want to look as holy on the outside as you are on the inside, even if you're faking it, check out CatholicMerch.store today for completely original and also awesome Catholic merch. This sweater is the Uber Catholic sweater. You can get yourself one today. And it supports our ministry because thank you, Catholic Merch, for 100% of your proceeds going to Awakened Catholic. Ignore the fact that it is Awakened Catholic.
You can also get the physically spiritual black old shirt featured in every episode of the show, whether it be the T-shirt, the long sleeve. Every once in a while, I'm still in my clothes from work, and I come in with the black collared shirt on. So CatholicMerchStore.com.
We don't have...
CatholicMerch.store.org.
No, stop. We do not have the official physically spiritual black garbs there. Unfortunately, we'll have to work on that. Okay, so that was a great Kerygma slow round. No, but truly, like awesome responses, and I really honestly want to go back and re-listen to them to just fully absorb all of it. Obviously, I came out of the womb understanding what the word solipsism means. But for the people in the back, could you just define that one more time?
Solipsism. So the root there is solo, one, alone. So if we think of modern philosophy, which a lot of people think kind of began with Descartes, which posited, I think, therefore I am. And so he starts his philosophical system in this isolated place, right? He goes off to this cabin by himself and ponders and realizes like the foundation of his existence is the fact that he cannot deny the fact that he exists because he's thinking about he exists, right? There's kind of a circular foundation. And the rest of modern thought sort of struggles to break out of this isolation from that cabin moment. To like establish what's sometimes referred to as empathy, right? The fact that if I think, therefore I am, and you think, therefore you are, like, how do we know we're really connected with each other? And we have some like modern expressions of this, of like, maybe we're just living in a simulation.
Oh, right. Okay.
Like, show to me that you're not just like, some AI computer code that I'm interacting with, right?
Yeah.
So these are just sort of the modern iterations of these old philosophical questions. So this idea of solipsism is that we and ourselves are at base an isolated unit that's separate from other people. So then we need to account for the fact that we're connected. And the truth that both the view from nature, but also the view from Revelation is that we're radically connected. And I need to account for the fact that I'm an individual in the midst of that connectedness, right? And let's think of it this way: like, can you account for the creation of any of your ideas apart from your relationships with other people?
No, absolutely not.
Right? Because as you're born into a certain state of society, and you're taught what in the midst of first you're like literally connected to another person when you're created. Like, you're like, where does your mom stop and you start? Like, you could, I guess, pull out the cells and figure out where the different DNA starts, right? But there's this radical connectedness, and then you're born into a family in which you're learning a language in a certain culture and a certain way of being, and then like there's a real way that we're connected even beyond ways that we can understand, right? So my nervous system is always reacting to your nervous system, like we're creating, in a sense, an emotional environment by our nervous systems interacting with each other, right? And even like my microbiome, like the colony of little microorganisms that are in all of my orifices and through my digestive tract, I have sort of like a microbiomal Oort cloud that surrounds me. So like my microorganisms are interacting with your microorganisms right now.
I'd really rather they didn't.
I know. So there's all these ways that we are as people like radically interconnected.
Yeah.
And so this idea of solipsism is really it's a philosophical fallacy that is present because you're starting with the wrong presupposition, right? So Descartes founding his philosophical system in isolation on his consciousness of his own consciousness. Christianity, on the other hand, begins with a communion of persons who out of love creates another person to be in communion with. Right? So the Christian foundation is this life of the Trinity, the one that's also three. Right? The place where relationship, in a sense, maybe the most ephemeral category, is the most concrete category.
Right. So it's almost like I'm hearing you communicate too that like there's a spiritual reality that is also reflected in the biological reality.
Amen.
And it's almost like it's physically spiritual.
Yeah, everything God created resonates with,
See what I did there,
his
Ethan?
life.
Ethan's booing me. Come on.
Yeah, God's creation just it resonates. There's a harmony between the life of the Trinity and God's design throughout the created order.
Yeah, it's incredible how, and that's one of the powerful things for me about theology of the body is like it really helps you to reflect on things that we just otherwise don't consider or notice. And which is also to me the beauty of your show, which is like everything is interconnected. Like nothing is obscure or irrelevant to the grand scheme of all of God's creation. Like it all plays into each other. There's this circle of life, you could say. Is the circle. All right. Anyway, another boo from Ethan. No, but that's all, yeah, absolutely important and valuable. And so to me, that's one of the things that I want to get into about your show is that comprehensive approach to the physical and the spiritual, because in our society, we're encouraged to see them as disparate topics, that we have a physical existence. If you want to even be a religious person and not just a secularist, like you might still believe in the spirituality of things, but see your physical existence as a shell in which your spirit resides or something, like a costume almost. And then in contrast, you can be, so spiritual that like the physical world is nothing, and like my body, when it dies, I will go to heaven in spirit, and like my body will wither and it'll just be that, versus the belief in the resurrection. And in fact, you'd be surprised how many Christians believe that worldview. Like I was in a conversation with someone, and I did not anticipate the degree to which they would be offended by the notion of the resurrection of her actual body. And she literally got red in the face, angry at me for communicating that. And I didn't know there'd be a confrontation at all. I didn't know that there would be a conflict of belief there at all. But some people are so offended by the notion that this ugly and dirty existence is going to die, but it is going to resurrect glorified, which is the example we see in Christ. So anyways, I appreciate about your show that you're presenting for people an escape from this dualistic way of seeing things and individualistic way of seeing things. And I want to get more into that, and about your show in general. But in terms of people who understand things in this dualistic way, there was a survey done, and these same people are the same jokesters that don't want us to continue the Catholic Weird Stuff segment. And, as far as I'm concerned, I want to pursue the truth, and I also want the Catholic Weird Stuff segment. And I think that the other people do want it. We're going to give the people what they want, Andrew. And so, Ethan, hit it.
Catholic Weird Stuff. Why do they do the things that they do? Let's learn some Catholic Weird Stuff. It's super weird.
Welcome back to the Catholic Weird Stuff, everyone. Today, Andrew brought to the table the topic of bilocation. If you've never heard of bilocation, it's the idea that, or it's the what it is to be physically in two places at the same time. Am I defining this correctly?
I'll clean it up for you.
Clean it up for me,
I
Andrew.
thought solipsism might qualify as the Catholic Weird Stuff, but we'll go with bilocation too. Yeah, so there's been this phenomenon noted at various, especially saints throughout the history of the church, where it's essentially known that they're in one location, right? They're like in their bedroom in the convent or whatever. Mm-hmm. But then it's recorded that they are also then somewhere else at the same time. Mm-hmm. Most famously is probably Padre Pio, St. Piero of Pietrelcina, who was known to do this. So at times he was known to appear beside airplanes during the Second World War, redirecting where the bombs were going to fall. At times he appeared to people and prayed with them on their deathbed, but they knew he was back in the friary in his cell. Mm-hmm. So what's curious about this kind of bilocation is the person isn't actually two places at once.
Ooh, okay. So
we believe, in a sense, that where you might say their physical body is, although whether or not where they're appearing there's also a physical manifestation or not could be up for debate. So where their physical body is, their consciousness is no longer sort of present there. Mm-hmm. But then where they're appearing, they're conscious in that other place. So they're not. It's not one person acting simultaneously in two different places.
That actually helps a lot because I've never understood that part. That makes more sense.
So their body is physically somewhere, and then their person is acting somewhere else. And then whether or not that miraculous event is accompanied either with simply the illusion of their form, or their form is actually sort of constructing a physical presence in that other place, I think that's maybe a little too much for the Catholic Weird Stuff segment, but that's bilocation.
Okay, now explain to me why this is not Catholic astral projection.
Catholic astral projection?
Yes.
So it's a work of grace, right? It's a miracle. So this is, I think, what would contrast many Catholic phenomenon from many New Age phenomena is that in general, the New Age movement mistakes the action of the divine for the action of the human.
Yes.
Right. So something like manifesting, for example, right? I just think about something hard enough and then it happens. Mm-hmm. What I'm doing is that attribute is providence. Right. So I'm taking what's proper to the divine of providence and I'm assigning it to the action of the human. Mm. Right. So I'm assuming that my consciousness also has this kind of providence-like influence on the world around me.
Interesting.
Right. So this kind of astral projection would be similar, that I'm sort of by my will, by my human nature, able to sort of push my form out past my physical bounds. And that's not something we believe is possible. Right. So this kind of bilocation, it's a miraculous work of grace, meaning it happens as a result of God doing it, right? And you're being used by him as an instrument in that moment.
So if the end result is not dissimilar, but the bigger divergence is how it's happening.
Correct.
Okay, so that makes a lot of sense, and that's really helpful because what you shared about the difference of not physically being in two places and not operating separately in two places, that clears a lot of this question up for me. And then as soon as you explained that part of it, it sounded an awful lot like astral projection. And then to me, this gets into this issue of like what you were bringing up with the New Age movement, and what we were talking about earlier with the Garden of Eden. Like there is just this incessant thing where we want to take what because anything is possible in God, and you know, that's why we see the saints perform incredible miracles. That's why Christ did things that defied the laws of physics. Like literally anything is possible in God, but it's like this obsession with taking upon ourselves the authority over nature, taking upon ourselves godhood with a capital G, versus the good lowercase g godhood that Christ refers to, that we are all called to and that we kind of are as saints. And so that's very interesting. Yeah.
The other thing to consider is one of the other kind of errors of the New Age movement is just the presupposition that everything is neutral. Right? So the world and all spiritual things are sort of neutral, and what makes it good or bad is how useful it is to me or the meaning that I assign to it. Right? So I, the actor in the world, am giving things value by my interaction with them, versus the classic Christian view, which is everything that God created is good, and then when we use it separate from God's plan, it is bad. Right? When we get outside of the God's design for things. So the question is, well, if this phenomenon of astral projection actually happens, and I don't have a reason to doubt that it does, if it's not as a result of the good mediating it, then what's happening? Right? And so
Yeah.
when we're making reference to a spiritual power, but also not inviting God into our life, that's a very spiritually dangerous place to be.
And I've said this before on the show and at events, like this is why the New Age movement fundamentally is Satanism. It is the worship of the self as God, and slapping that label on yourself and taking that label away from God. It's the pursuit of power and you know, your desires at whatever expense, essentially. So yeah, wow, okay. That was the Catholic Weird Stuff segment. By location, there you go. Catholic astral projection. Just kidding, it's not. But all right, so let's go back to the topic of physically spiritual. So we were talking about how we see the Trinity in all of creation. One of the things that Alina and I were talking about recently was we were pondering how it's interesting that in the Catholic theological context, we understand that this notion of when we go to heaven, what's kind of also really happening there is we are entering into a complete union with God that we experience here incompletely as a foreshadowing in, for example, receiving the Eucharist, or, you know, entering into covenant in our baptism and whatever. Like in the conference of grace and the sacraments, those are all occasions of communion with God in different ways. But in heaven, like, we don't need something that gives us a taste of something. Like our existence is communion with God in heaven. It's interesting how that resembles, and it's funny that we have been talking about the New Age movement, how in the New Age movement, so much of their way of seeing death is that we are all energy, and our energy, when we die, gets absorbed into the universal energy. And so it's interesting because it's like they're almost scratching at the surface of something that is partially almost a truth, with the mistake that they, in being absorbed into that universal energy, they lose their individuality as well. And so that would be an example of where it's like they're almost there, but it's not right. And I see this across the board, that like so many different major world religions and ways of seeing spirituality, they all are trying so hard and they come so close, but just like the slightest diverging point, right? So like Christ says, there are many rooms in my Father's mansion or whatever. And then you have, is it the Mormons or the Jehovah's Witnesses? One of them think that every person gets a planet, you know? And so, okay, I can see how there's like a little bit of an overlap there, but it's like that planet is also their domain, and they're, you know, the king of that, the god of that planet or something. And so it's like everyone is like so close, but missing the mark. And to me, it's like, it's interesting because in every one of those ways that it misses the mark, it's like you can kind of see that what bubbles to the surface as a constant across each of those attempts at truth. What bubbles to the surface there is pride, and that it's about me, and like I deserve to own a planet and be the Lord over it.
Yeah, and I think underneath pride is it's a lot of fear, because like we're creatures, so like we have survival instincts, and those survival instincts. So like when we don't have security, we're designed to reach for something to make us secure.
Oh wow, yeah.
So I think what's beneath what on the surface or from a moral perspective is pride. Beneath it, though, is a lot of fear and insecurity.
Wow.
There's two really important distinctions we need to hold on to, because even a lot of Catholic people commit a lot of category errors in the way they speak by not holding on to these distinctions. And this is essential to understand the New Age movement too, and also to understand the Physically Spiritual podcast. One is the distinction between physical and spiritual, body and spirit. The other is the distinction between the natural and the supernatural.
Yes, okay.
A lot of people will say things like, well, it's sort of like, we have the natural stuff and then we have the soul. It's like you have nature and then you have spirit. Mm-hmm. And they're making a category here because the opposite of nature isn't spirit. The opposite of nature is supernatural.
Yes.
Right, so everything that God created in his first bestowal of existence in the order that we live in is what's natural, including the angels, including us, body and soul, including all of creation. All of that's natural. Right? There's nothing more natural than a demon because it's pure nature. That what God gave it in giving it life and giving it existence, apart from all of the supernatural grace that God offers in Christ's redemption of us, right? So the demon is a pure nature, not supernatural phenomenon.
Right. Same with an angel. Same with whatever.
Well, an angel though is living in God with the divine life.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So the angel is enjoying is very more supernatural than we are.
Sure, but its essence is natural. It's just participating in the right.
Yeah. So then we have what's supernatural is God's various ways that He intervenes in that natural order, whether it be through you see His great works throughout the Scripture in the Old Testament. We see it happening now in an ordinary way in what Christ works through His passion, death, and resurrection, and through the continued relationship of grace between the angels and God. Now, the other distinction here between the physical and the spiritual, right? So physical things are essentially things that we can experience with our senses, right? So I can see things, I can taste things. Physical things have location, they have size, they have weight. Spiritual things, on the other hand, don't have those categories. So oftentimes people will ask questions that don't make any sense, like, where is your soul?
Right.
Well, whereness, location, is a quality of something physical.
Yeah.
So asking where is your soul is asking the question like why doesn't the coffee grow a trunk?
Right.
It's just not proper to the nature of coffee to have a trunk. It's nonsense. It's not proper to a spiritual thing to have location.
Yeah.
Either.
That's so
it's just a category here. So when we pull these distinctions in now and think about something like the New Age movement, right? I think there's observable phenomena in nature that science doesn't yet account for. So I think some people, because of the way they continue to hold on to some of the doctrine from the scientific revolution, they take that and they believe, well, if we can't explain it, that means there's something supernatural happening. Not necessarily.
Right.
It could just be some phenomenon we don't understand yet.
Like women.
Or like the way that the subtle interactions of our person with the world around us affect the world around us. Right? Like how can you make the statement that manifesting something is actually having an effect on the world around you apart from just the effect that your presence has on the world around you?
Yeah, your actions.
Right. So there's a way that the movement, I think, falls into what's classically been called a God of the gaps argument. Right. You can't explain that, so therefore God fills the gaps. So I think the New Age movement has a similar thing that they do, where they say, well, we can't explain this, so therefore astral projection, therefore manifesting, therefore insert whatever thing you might into that. So foundationally, what the Physically Spiritual podcast is, in a lot of ways, I try to think about the world, both what's offered to us by God's gift of grace and revelation and the church's theology and the sacraments and the whole wealth of what the church gives us in the deposit of the faith. But then I also try to pull in everything we understand of the natural world in God's providence by the scientific revolution, right? By the explorations of science, of medicine, of psychology, so on and so forth. And we try to keep all the categories clear, right? What's natural, what's supernatural, what's physical, what's spiritual. And we simply ask the question, if this is true, what does it mean for my life? Right? If this is true, what does it mean for my life?
And it has, like, that is the fundamental question, because people all the time get super excited to learn some things, but like, okay, but what are you doing with that information? And this stuff that we're talking about and what your show is about, like, is so foundational. And so to receive the information that one could learn in Physically Spiritual and not apply it to your life would just be absolutely absurd. Yeah.
Amen.
Could you do a similar like, that was a beautiful analysis, comparison between, our capital T truth in a Catholic, our understanding of things, in contrast to the New Age movement. Could you do something similar in the other direction, with kind of a materialist worldview in contrast to our faith?
Yeah, the materialist would simply be stating that everything can be explained by what's physically present. So essentially making the claim that anything that we don't understand yet, it's simply because we haven't done enough science yet, or we don't have the right instruments to measure it or to observe it, so on and so forth. So there's a presumption that you kind of dig down and you don't find anything other than more stuff. And what's difficult is, to some extent, they're right.
Okay.
Meaning, it's not like you're gonna dig deep enough down into the way that matter is constructed and eventually find a soul. Eventually you're gonna find something you can't measure or can't weigh or can't observe. No, you're gonna continue to dig down and you'll find smaller and smaller and smaller particles or different physical phenomena that can be explained eventually by science.
Right.
Because we're not claiming that spirit is something physical that's taking up space, right? It's literally by definition not physical.
Right.
So the spiritual and the physical coexist in the same. It's hard to talk about because you want to say like space,
right?
But really, they co-inhabit the same existence simultaneously without competing with one another, and actually they're interdependent in a way where they simultaneously explain and account for one another, and the one can't be without the other.
And that's what you call death.
The separation of the soul from the body. But even beyond that, really what death is the breakdown of your identity into smaller identities.
Whoa. Break that down.
Right. So like an organic substance, it's an accumulation of parts that has an identity that makes it a one. Right. So it's really a many that's a one that has life. So like, at what point, if you start lobbing pieces of me off, am I no longer me?
Right. Okay.
Right. If you cut off my hand, well, there's me, and then there's what used to be my hand. And now, what's the principle of unity for that hand? Right. Is it just a collection of atoms that happen to be joined together? Because at some point, it starts to break down. It starts to decay, and then you just have a pile of goo.
Ew. And
then you just have some bones, and eventually you just have its constituent mineral and element parts that
stardust
that are whatever, right? So what is the principle of unity in an inorganic substance, right? And you just keep digging down further and further and further and further. If they could cut my head off and keep me alive, by some device or some machine. I'm making a reference to That Hideous Strength, C.S. Lewis's great science fiction work. At that point, like, if I'm alive, I'm still me, right? And the rest of my body would be the dead substance of whatever it is. Now in that book, spoiler alert, they find out that it's a demon inhabiting the head that they think that they've separated and kept alive. And I feel like I've gotten too far away from the question to answer it at this point.
It's all good.
But yeah, this for the materialist, ultimately the mistake is to assume that because you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Right? And we can't fight this with the argument that what we don't understand yet is where God kind of fills in the gap, or our spirit fills in the gap.
Right. That's silly.
Right? Because we believe that the physical and the spiritual are simultaneous and interdependent in a way that each one is sort of on its own, in its own categories, sort of explanatory, but on the other hand, in its metaphysical categories, isn't explaining. Right? So this is a big question for science, is like, when does something die? Is death when it's brain dead? Is death when the heart stops? Is death when, it's kind of like, it when you see it, kind of like the Supreme Court's definition of pornography. It's like how do we assign meaning to that? And our classic definition is, well, when the soul separates from the body. Well, how do you measure that? You can't measure that.
Yeah.
But you can know it. Right? You can know it. If you've ever interacted with a corpse, you know it's not a person.
Daily basis.
If you interact with a person, you know it's a person. So this is our human capacity of reason. And so this, I think, is ultimately where classic philosophy demonstrates the immaterial reality, is you demonstrate it through a process of deduction based on the human faculty of reason. And this is like in Aristotle's De Anima, his study of the soul, ultimately where he makes an argument for the immortality of the soul, is based on this faculty of reason. And anyway, we're probably getting a little too
No,
too
but I mean,
out
it's
there.
that was excellent. So, it's essentially, if something is true, it has to be observably true. That's essentially kind of, so anything that is not observable cannot be true. So that's so interesting. And it's so small-minded, as far as I can tell, as well. Like, ultimately, it's so...
Well, people are grasping at survival without God.
Right.
So I think it's important not to assign like character judgments. If it's existence is no joke.
No, it's tough.
Like, look at history.
Yeah.
Like we're kind of in the Pax Americana right now, and it's a nice time to be alive. But like, if you study history, like staying alive is no joke. Like, this isn't like you take God out of the picture and you got to figure crap out.
Yeah.
Or else stuff's going to be bad for you. So I think we need to approach people who have a different understanding with a lot of compassion.
For sure. And that's true for like literally anything we've been talking about here, or in our last live stream as well. And I think the other thing that just came to mind for me is like, it's a worldview that I think is a grasping at retaining some control, because it's like people get freaked out if they don't understand something. And if there is something that is not directly understandable by observation, then it's a lot easier for me to like feel like things are orderly or make sense, and we kind of need to have that control. And again, it goes all the way back to the garden. It's control. It's who is the God, me or God? So I think in the illustration you've given us of kind of these two, I don't want to say extremes, because it's not like New Age is the opposite of materialism, but these two, like, not on the same spectrum, but extremes of approaches to spirituality or whatever, or the lack of it. With that all laid out, I think that it can be then, concluded like the full integration of both truths, like the spiritual and the physical, like we have to see things for what they really are, And that is the only way that we're really going to be able to become the fullest version of ourselves, the most complete, the most healed. And I think that is the real value in what you're talking about, because you talk about nutrition. A cajillion people are talking about nutrition online, on social media, podcasts, whatever. But what you're doing is you're saying, here is how nutrition plays a role in your spiritual life, in your physical well-being at such a deeper and more granular level than just like, here is your food pyramid and whatever. Like, no. And I think that whether it's nutrition or physical exercise or meditation or prayer or whatever, like, you are approaching these topics in this broader question of the entire person, physical and spiritual. And I think that is the real reason that your show is such a gem, and the authenticity that the information you have because of the journey you've been on, where you had to discover this stuff to find your own healing and your own growth, and it was executed on, and continues to be, presumably. I don't know, but
yeah, I mean, existence is no joke. I've been blessed to be broken enough that I've always had to strive. It's really hard for virtuous people to find God sometimes, because sometimes they don't feel the need for it. So I like to say that I've been blessed to be broken.
That's beautiful.
One thing I like to say too is that healing isn't an end in and of itself.
Ooh.
Like, the destination is connection.
Yes.
Right. The destination is connection, and healing is a means to an end. That is connection with God and with other people, because we're so foundationally more one than we are separate. And so that's one caveat that I like to make. A lot of the journey is understanding where the knowledge is coming from. Right? You mentioned earlier, like, big T truth.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why, like, scientific knowledge is different than theological knowledge is because of the difference of how it's discovered. Right? What we learn from Revelation, our doctrines, our moral teachings in our church, we call them big T truths, because those are revealed to us by God. Right, so it's not something that's limited for by our perception or our capacity to measure or to discover something. So this is why doctrines and dogmas don't change or don't evolve. And there's been theologians that have had issues because they've over applied categories that have been discovered through science to theological knowledge in a way that then distorts the nature of revelation. So our theological knowledge doesn't evolve. What it does is our ability to apply it needs to be continually renewed, because the world around us is changing. And then our understanding of it will grow ever deeper. Mm-hmm. But it grows in the way that an organic substance grows. Right? So I was me when I was in my mother's womb, and I was me when I was a baby, and I was me when I was a child, and I'm now me when I'm an adult. And I'll still be me when I'm old and decrepit and all of that. Right? So I'm growing and changing, but my identity is always the same, right? I'm still me. Mm-hmm. In the same way, a theological doctrine or teaching might grow and develop. It might need to be applied different based on the circumstances it's in, but it's always still the same. Mm-hmm. Right? So this is where you might track out a teaching like the Immaculate Conception of Mary, right? And you can find signs of that all the way back from the early church, of people who might have even personally known Mary in our writing about Mary in the early church. And then you see how it's developed over time, and then it's clearly defined by the church at a certain point in history. And that is a development of our doctrine, but it's this kind of organic growth of what's happened. On the other hand, scientific knowledge is always iterative, and it's always what's the right word? It's always growing and developing and changing in a different sort of way. It's always provisional, I think is the right term.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
It's always provisional. So this is where it's confusing in, like, people in our contemporary society will say things like follow the science or will science like that's anti-scientific.
Or I am the science.
Yeah, so all these things are like they're really big category errors. Like those are the sorts of labels that we would ascribe to theological knowledge, to God's revelation. Like the second you feel like you've discovered and exhausted something through scientific inquiry is the moment that you can be sure that you're wrong. Because our capacity to observe and measure and understand is going to continue to grow on and on, right? So the classic example of this is like the Newtonian physics being, in a way, superseded by Einstein's theories. A lot about Newton's theories still continue to explain reality, like a lot of the equations still work, but there's a whole new thing that Einstein presents to the world, an understanding of reality that explains it in a deeper and more convincing way. And we can be convinced that there will be a theory at some point in the future that supersedes Einstein's theories.
I'm sure.
And hopefully sooner than later, because a lot of our system depends on a growth of the foundational understanding of the world. So this kind of understanding of science, we need to hold our science with humility. Right? We hold our theological statements with an assurance of faith, of God's revelation, but that assurance is based upon God. It's not based upon us, the strength of our mind, our ability to understand. No, it's based on our understanding of God and His revelation, where we always need to hold our scientific knowledge with humility. And this is the problem with publishing anything based on science, is because by the time the book gets out, it'll probably be wrong.
Right.
Like there's a big issue in science of the ability to replicate theories and replicate experiments, where people will be like, well, this is evidence-based and everything I say is based on an experiment that somebody has published somewhere where they've, double-blinded the research and it's a controlled trial and all these other categories. But then another scientist will try to replicate it and they can't. Or they get a different result, or somebody does another experiment later and it's different. So there's this reality that the best scientist is the humble scientist, that holds his findings loosely and is hopeful that he can discover more. So now as we then try to have both scientific knowledge help us to understand our faith more deeply and allow our understanding of the faith to guide our scientific pursuits, right? It becomes kind of tricky, but you have to hold the nature of the knowledge close in order to not confuse and muddle things. And this is where a lot of people who attempt an integration of faith and reason get into trouble and things get muddled, right? Because they don't really hold on to the nature of the inquiry that's been used to discover the truth that you're talking about.
That's so interesting.
And so that's really what at core, what I'm trying to do in a really like nerdy way to explain it. I get that if anyone's still listening, as I'm trying to keep track of the categories that I'm talking about and the kind of inquiry, and then asking the question, how do these ideas inspire one another? Once I talked about, it's a theory from evolution called antagonistic pleiotropy.
Those are words I use every day.
Yeah. But I talked about how that is reflected in some elements of the spiritual life. So antagonistic pleiotropy is basically the idea that because of environmental pressures in our genetics, things that are adaptive early in the life cycle of an organism become maladaptive later in the life cycle of an organism.
Interesting.
A concrete example of this is simply when you're growing up, you need a lot of extra calories, right? So underfeeding your children is a big problem.
Okay.
And you can just dump them with food and they grow and grow and grow. But there's a certain point as an organism you stop growing. So actually a lot of longevity research indicates that actually the more you underfeed somebody as they get older, the longer they'll live.
Interesting.
So there's a shift that happens, and this is because of the genetics, right? Where this shift occurs in the organism. Now, it's not a universal rule because underfeeding protein is a really bad thing for older people because they're losing muscle and bone, and their ability to process protein has declined a lot as they've gotten older, right? So there has to be some wisdom that applied around this. Now, we take that idea and we look at a phenomenon like the spiritual life, right? And there's a shift that happens in the ages of the spiritual life in the way that God interacts with our soul. And one of those shifts is the shift between meditation and contemplation. what meditation is, in essence, is you're understanding God by analogy, by understanding what God has revealed to us. So you're taking something from nature or from revelation, like a scripture, and you're thinking about it. You're actively imagining it, considering it, pondering it, and then you're entering into a deeper relationship with God through this kind of inquiry with your mind. But there's a limit to that, because every image we can conceive of for God, every way we can conceptualize and every thought we have,
It'll all fall short.
falls short.
Yeah.
So there's a shift that happens between the purgative and illuminative way, where prayer shifts from meditative prayer, which is discursive, to contemplative prayer, which is infused. And when like John of the Cross talks about this, he talks about it being a dark night.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why is it dark? It's a relational moment with God. God is still present, but there's no categories, right? There's no image. So God is there, in a sense, your will is held by God.
Yeah.
But your intellect is empty, because nothing your intellect could possibly hold on to could approximate the divine essence.
Yeah. Yeah, like the more you tear away your preconceptions, the more open you become to what is.
Right.
Yeah, that's powerful stuff.
Right.
That's really good.
So this is where, like, and I think there's a similarity here with the growth of the spiritual organism with the growth of the physical organism. This kind of shift of what somebody needs to grow in the illuminative way is different than what somebody needs to grow and be healthy in the purgative way.
Mm-hmm.
The same way when you're a child, what a healthy child needs in their diet is different than what a healthy adult needs in their diet. And so this category we have from science can help us to more deeply understand what we understand from Revelation.
Yeah.
But there's people that muddle the categories. A famous example is probably Teilhard de Chardin, who brought in concepts of the theory of evolution into the ideas of the development of doctrine.
We just lost all of the Protestants that were watching.
Yeah. So anyways, it's basically making the claim that our doctrines and theological understandings change in a way similar to the way evolution occurs. Right. So in evolution, the identity of the thing changes as a result of environmental exposure. So eventually the monkey becomes a human, or the cat becomes a lion, or whatever shift happens. So this is an inappropriate way to bring scientific categories into theological understandings, because we'd be making the claim that as times change, doctrine actually changes. Mm-hmm. Not just in its accidents, but in its identity, in its substance.
Yeah. Well, I know that learning from you both in person and through your show has really like set me on fire for a deeper understanding about the things that we're talking about here. And I've been very inspired by you for my own physical health and for my spiritual health. And I want to invite everyone who is watching or listening to this, whether now in the live stream or later on a recording, maybe you've never thought about some of the things that we're talking about here. And that's probably true for a lot of us. But I think that there is so much potential for spiritual and physical growth and maturing, and see where God wants to take you in that arena. So I want to invite you to please check out Andrew's show, Physically Spiritual. And he always makes these very high-level ideas very practical. And, if I can understand it, anyone can. So check out physicallyspiritual.com to learn more about his show. And if you want to become a patron of his show, you can join their private patron community in the upcoming Awaken app. And get some exclusive benefits there. So again, physicallyspiritual.com. Once again, actually, before I say this, I want to make an announcement here, and I'll do something more formal later on social media and stuff. But I'm doing a drawing for a free registration to the Holy Land pilgrimage that I'm doing later this year with Father Eric Schild. So if you are interested in going to the Holy Land free of charge, then register for the Awakened Catholic mailing list on our website. And literally, that's all it takes is you join the mailing list and you are officially entered into the drawing for this free Holy Land trip that is happening later this year. And the spots are limited. We wanted to keep this a very manageable and intimate pilgrimage. And so if you are interested in going, make sure to register as soon as possible, but also make sure to join the mailing list in case you're able to get a free trip. Now, finally, I want to thank today's sponsor for this episode, CatholicMerch.store, giving 100% of your proceeds to support the mission of Awaken Catholic. Disregard the fact that Awaken Catholic owns CatholicMerch.store. And you can get great, original, awesome Catholic swag like the Uber Catholic hoodie that I'm wearing right now, and it supports the mission. So CatholicMerch.store. If you want to make a donation to Awaken Catholic, whether it's one time or recurring, then visit awakencatholic.org/donate, and you can join us in mission and be a part of what makes all of this possible. Andrew, I really appreciate you. I appreciate you in my life as a mentor, as a brother, and for being on this show, man.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. All right, everyone, before you go, I just need you to know that Jesus loves you. Peace.